What is going on, Badger fans? Welcome to another episode of Locked On Badgers. Really fun show today. Something I've been wanting to talk about a little bit. The brands in the Big Ten, USC, UCLA coming on board. Where does Wisconsin fit in that hierarchy? What tier is the Wisconsin brand? Who leads the conference? Who's in the bottom tier? Let's talk about all that and more in today's Locked On Badgers. Let's go.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Locked On Badgers, your team every single day. Really do appreciate everybody tuning in. As always, you guys are the best. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, official sports book of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. We got a special new guest coming on today, Lucas Rody. Lucas, thank you for joining us. Really do appreciate it. We've been talking in the background, kind of back and forth. Wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself. You have your own podcast, and let's talk some Big Ten tiers. Oh, he's paused up. There he is.
There we are. Sorry about that.
No worries. Did you get the intro?
I did not. No, it froze right when I got put on camera.
This is the magic of live YouTube shows. So Lucas Rody coming on board. We've been talking in the background for a while. Big time Badger fan, really knowledgeable, has his own podcast. Lucas, I want to have you on just to talk Big Ten tiers because you have a podcast that talks a lot about Pac-12, Big Ten. Let's start there. Talk a little bit about your podcast, where people can find what you're doing, and then let's get into some tiers.
Yeah, so I appreciate one for having me on, and two, so me and my old college buddy Ryan Bafalukas, we do a college football podcast called Running for the Roses. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter at Running for Roses, and we really cover everything. He's an Arizona State grad. I'm a Wisconsin grad, so we do touch on a lot of Big Ten, Pac-12, but also everything in the realm of college football. Like, for example, this past week, we just posted an episode talking about the SEC scheduling options coming up for football when Texas and Oklahoma come into the conference, and what teams will play what, and who will play who, and things like that. So really enjoy just the whole scope of the sport and just college athletics. But also a diehard Badger fan at heart.
Love it. And we'll link your show where people can find it. We'll put that in the show notes as well when we put that out so people can go check out what Lucas is doing. It's always good to have more voices in college football speaking up. I think we get smarter when we bring people from the community on. All right, Lucas, let's get into this. With UCLA, USC coming into the Big Ten, I wanted to talk about just the brands. Like, let's rank them out. Where in the hierarchy does Wisconsin fit? Where does everybody fit? So we each broke it into 4 tiers, and we left the criteria kind of purposely vague, right? What's important to me may not be important to you, and vice versa. So let's start in tier 4. We are mostly just focusing on athletic brands here, so we didn't really factor in the academics portion too much. But who's in your tier 4? And then I'll give you mine, and we'll kind of chop it up.
All right. So I think this was maybe the easiest tier to do. So that might upset some people of some of these teams. But my tier 4 were Northwestern, Rutgers, and Illinois. Like you said, going from a pure athletic standpoint, I know academics are kind of part of the Big Ten brand, that it pairs academic excellence with athletic accomplishments. But I think just overall, you look at Northwestern, really for most of their history, were a doormat in both football and basketball. I mean, this year alone, we're celebrating because it's the second time ever that they're making the NCAA tournament. And obviously the academic side plays a big role in that because of the amount of people that they're able to get into that school or the amount of people they're able to recruit. But I think just being a doormat for a long part of their program, Rutgers, I think, is the easiest one. You could make an argument they've been maybe the worst D1 athletic department in a Power 5 school for a long, long time. And then I just had Illinois. Yes, maybe you could put them in the tier above because historically their basketball program has been pretty good, and some of their non-revenue sports have generally done pretty well. But just on the football side, I mean, they've only had a handful of winning seasons over the past few decades. I think their brand, and I think when we talk about brand, even in the state of Illinois, it's kind of hard to find Illinois diehard fans if you don't outside of Champaign. In Chicago, their biggest city, I mean, it's such a Big Ten melting pot that I just don't think, even in their home state, that brand is very, very big. So that's why I put Illinois in that bottom tier.
No, I think that's a good list. My bottom tier is just a tick bigger than yours, but I start off, and I actually ranked it inside this tier too. So my bottom of tier 4 is Rutgers. I'm right there with you. Like they bring nothing to the conference. A bad program really all around. Obviously, Shiano's there. He hasn't really been able to turn them around in the 2 years he's been there. Then I have Northwestern right above them, kind of also in that bottom tier. Again, just back-to-back 1-8 seasons in conference. I think Pat Fitzgerald's never won a Big Ten title. He's been there since 2006. The basketball program, we talked about the futility of it before. I do as well have Illinois in that bottom tier. Again, more of a basketball school that hasn't really excelled in basketball. Up to their level, right? Like if there's some schools where you're one or the other, but you better be darn good in that one. And Illinois really hasn't done that. I also have Maryland in my tier 4. Again, to me, it's kind of a basketball school that you have to go back a while. They have a national title. It's in the early 2000s, but when's their last meaningful run? And the football side has been mediocre to really bad for a long time. So Maryland also in my bottom 4. That's what makes up my tier 4. Yours with the addition of Maryland.
Yours. So let me see here. So yeah, I would do those bottom 3. I actually had Maryland. This is where we disagree. I had them in my second tier of Big Ten teams. So when we move up there, but yeah, and then above that, so above my bottom tier, I had Indiana, kind of for the same reason that you had Illinois, where if you're going to be really good at one of the two, you need to be excellent. Indiana
for tier 3 right now.
What's that?
We're getting into tier 3.
Oh, tier 3. Yes, I'm saying this is my tier 3. Just above my tier 4, I would have Indiana right there. Because like you were saying, for basketball, it's been really up or down, really, since Bob Knight was let go there. They did win a national title. I think last is like in the 90s or in the 80s. But they've been very, very up and down. And obviously football, outside of a couple of really nice years under Tom Allen, they've been kind of a dumpster fire. I have Minnesota right there for the same reasons. They just haven't been particularly great in either one. I know these last few years under PJ Fleck have been maybe the best era, but the fact is like if 9-4 is kind of like your golden era, that means there wasn't much success prior to that. I have Purdue in that third tier. One, I think basketball holds them up a lot right now. We were kind of talking about before the podcast. So I think they're kind of like the standard bearer, I think, in the Big Ten Conference right now over the last 5-6 years when it comes to success. But football's largely been up or down, a lot more down than up. And they just lost maybe their best head coach that I think they've had in a very, very long time. And then I have Iowa kind of topping out that last of the third, at the top of that third tier. They've been, I think you could make an argument to put them in the second tier because they've overall been pretty consistent for the last couple decades, especially in football, but then also in basketball. As much as I can't stand Fran McCaffrey, I think he's a decent head coach. Like he has created a good floor for Iowa where they're almost a consistent tournament team. But I think for most of their history, they've kind of been upward down. But I also think what's also been elevating too, their women's basketball has been extremely good. And they also have maybe the best wrestling program in the country. So, but because those are slightly non-revenue sports, I don't think it helps them out a ton. So I just have Iowa just on the top of that third tier.
Interesting. Yeah. We have many disagreements, which I love. We're going to get into that next. I got to take a quick break for our friends of the show. We're going to get into it next. I'm going to disagree slightly on Minnesota, Iowa. We have a disagreement on Maryland coming up as well. I want to get your take on why you have them a little higher than I do. I'm excited for that one. But first, our friends of the show today, taking a quick break. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Our new sportsbook is what we use with the NBA season winding down, March Madness going on. It is a great time to get into the FanDuel world. And especially if you're a new-time user, you get your no-sweat first bet. That's $1,000 back in no sweat first bet. Bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores, three-pointers drained. One of my favorite NBA bets. I've talked about it I've got the Suns plus 650 now to win the title. That the odds went down a little bit because Durant got hurt, but Durant will be back for the playoffs. I mean, knock on wood, right? The guy's kind of getting to be that Mr. Glass, but he should be back for the playoffs. If that's the case, you're getting great odds on the Suns to win the title. Plus, you can do player props, combine it all into a single game parlay. Lets you get your immediate payout, more money, and make it a little more exciting. So don't miss your chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets back when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon today to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's keep going here. Again, got Lucas on. Really do enjoy this. Before the show, we talked a little bit. I actually had 5 tiers, right? You had 3. So we kind of came together and created 4 to find a good melting pot. But just as a disclaimer, if we were sticking to the 5, I had Minnesota and Indiana in between. So they were in kind of my tier 4 then, right?
Gotcha.
So I had them above that bottom group we just talked about, but not quite into that elite category. With Minnesota, it's just you're not good enough at either, right? Minnesota, like you said, football's been better, but basketball's been kind of a low-key disaster.
Mm-hmm.
And football better doesn't mean football's been really good. And I just don't think there's a huge brand appeal there either. When you're talking about brands, some of it is almost hard to characterize. Like Nike is a brand. You can just recognize it. It has cachet. I see people like top level recruits all the time in Minnesota that Minnesota's after football and basketball leaving the state, right? It doesn't have that brand pull and appeal. With Indiana, I think the brand is really strong. Everybody knows that basketball brand, but it hasn't, again, like the Illinois point, it really hasn't been living up to that reputation. And football has certainly been down the last couple of years. All right, so that's kind of my in-between. Now, let's get into tier 3 for me. You went through yours. I have Purdue in tier 3. Really, a lot of the same reasons you have them. Basketball program's been really good. Now, you would kind of feel like last year was maybe their chance to really have that really special year where they win a title with Edey and Ivy. But it's been a rock-solid basketball program. Then I have Michigan State. I have Iowa. And I'll just go through my list here. I have UCLA in my tier 3.
Ooh.
Which I know it's going to be interesting. Then I've got Wisconsin, and then I got Nebraska leading my tier 3, and it's kind of ranked in that order. So I have Wisconsin in tier 3. I have Nebraska at the top of that tier 3 list. I have UCLA. Listen, the UCLA thing's interesting to me, and I want your take on this. Maybe when we get, obviously you have a higher tier for them, so maybe when we get to your tier where they're in, the basketball brand is obviously iconic. Right? Yes. Incredibly iconic basketball brand. They have won conference championships for a multitude of sports, an incredibly rich history. It's also a sport where Chip Kelly's been there for 5 or 6 years. His best year is 9-4. It's a sport that lost the athletic department lost $120 million over 3 years. It's part of the reason they came to the Big Ten, right? Because they're floundering from a financial standpoint in a sense. So, and again, if we're talking a huge basketball brand, what's in the last 10, 20 years, how many great UCLA teams have there been?
It's true.
So I feel like they live a little bit on the LA swag. I feel like they live a little bit on the history, but recency hasn't been overly kind to UCLA. I'll pause there because that's kind of my tier 3. We have multiple differences already, and get your take on my UCLA take.
So it's funny we're talking about brands with UCLA. This might be telling for UCLA, the fact that Under Armour, when they were going through financial issues, decided to axe their contract with UCLA over all the other brands. It was like a $200-some million contract they had with UCLA, and they axed them. So that might tell you what Under Armour thought of UCLA, especially football at the time. For UCLA, some of the points you brought up were why I elevated them into my tier 2 was just because they've been so successful. Obviously, basketball, I believe they have the most national titles ever. I mean, most of those were won in the 60s and 70s, but they even had a run in the mid-2000s under Ben Howland where they went to 3 consecutive Final Fours. They just went to a Final Four a couple of years ago with Mick Cronin. I know that was kind of more of a Cinderella run. It wasn't like everyone that year was anticipating them to have that type of season. And it was the COVID year where a lot of weird stuff happened. But that's kind of where I just elevated them. I know football's very up or down for them. They're kind of like, they're like 5-7, or they might be going to the Rose Bowl. But even at their peak, they're not where USC is at their peak, when USC is peaking, USC is going to be like a national champion contender. they're winning their conference every year. UCLA really hasn't had that type of sustained success. So that's why I didn't have them, honestly, in my top tier. But you look at the overall athletic department, I believe they were I looked this up, they were number 2 for just total national titles of any athletic department in the country. And I think that does weigh a little bit. We'll see how that changes when they do join the Big Ten. I do like the marks that you make, that like their athletic department was not doing fairly well. Like that has to impact you. But I think the overall academic achievement in the history they have, and I do think, though we are looking at it strictly an athletic lens, I do think the LA brand is something that they really, really sell well, and USC does too. And I think they're actually going to enhance that when they join the Big Ten, because they are going to be the LA school in the conference.
So that's a great point bringing up there. What does UCLA, because I'm not worried about USC is going to be a monster wherever they are, but what does UCLA do with an influx of Big Ten cash, right? That could be one of those cases where that brand suddenly becomes much more reminiscent of the brand that it was in the 60s, 70s. You know, even the UCLA football was going to the Rose Bowl in the 90s, 2000s. So maybe that cash helps them get back to that point. I just look at the last couple decades and just kind of, to me, it's kind of there's not a lot of substance on those bones. All right, let's go to our tier 2. So that was our tier 3s. My tier 2 is very simple. It's Penn State.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, and I, again, some of this to me, I also looked up athletic revenue, you know, but some of this is just, if you zoom out nationally, who are the major and I put more weight on college football here. Who are the major college football brands? Like Penn State is in a category that, as much as Wisconsin wants to be there, and as much as I want, they're not in that category. Yeah, in my opinion. So I have Penn State in the number 2 slot. They're the only school I have in the tier 2. I have Wisconsin at the top of my tier 3 with Nebraska. So how about you? What's your tier 2?
So the top of your tier 3 basically bleeds into my tier 2. Okay, pretty much. So mine was bigger. My tier 2 was actually my biggest tier. I had 5 teams in it. So I had Nebraska filling up the bottom. I know the football success has not been there, and that is their bread and butter. Okay, they really don't. I mean, they care for other sports, but let's be frank, they care about Nebraska football. The history is there. The fan base is phenomenal. The fact that they've been as bad as they've been and they still average, I know it's not technically, they're really not selling out those games, but I know they still say it is. But the fact that they're still getting 70, 80,000 people to those games every week, they're probably going to have a sellout for their spring day again this year, I think still means a lot. And I think that brand is still really, really strong. I think people still have an idea in their head, like a recruit in Texas or a recruit in California knows what Nebraska football still stands for. So that's why I still hold them there. Also, they're a powerhouse in women's volleyball. I love volleyball. So they are always powerhouse, and I love that Wisconsin kind of has the edge on them now. I have Maryland in my tier 2. This was our biggest difference one. I think just the success they've had in basketball, even joining the Big Ten, they've still been pretty good. They took a share of the Big Ten title back in 2020. They haven't had maybe those deep runs that they had under Gary Williams, but I still think overall the Maryland basketball brand is strong. Their fan base is really, really good. I think the Infinity Center is one of the best venues in the Big Ten to watch a basketball game. And then I think across the board, some of their other sports, they're really good in men's lacrosse, men's baseball. They're very, very good. Soccer, a lot of their non-revenue sports, they've really, really done. They've won a ton of Big Ten titles since they've joined the conference. So I think that does weigh a little bit, and that's kind of why I weighed them there at the tier 2. Michigan State, largely because of basketball, arguably outside of Indiana, maybe the best basketball program in the Big Ten historically. And especially recently, they're the last Big Ten team to win a national title in men's basketball. So they do have that. Tom Izzo, arguably, maybe outside of Bob Knight, probably going to go down as one of the best head coaches in Big Ten history. And then also in football, they're outside of Ohio State, Michigan. They're the only other Big Ten team to make the college football playoff. And obviously they've been up and down the past 5 or 6 years. But I think football, they've made tremendous strides since the early 2000s, where they were kind of like a middle tier, like bowl team every single year. So that's where I had them. I have Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin would be up there with Penn State in like your tier if most of Wisconsin's success had been historical. But a lot of the success we have of Wisconsin is really when Barry Alvarez took over in the mid-90s. Basically, that's really when you look at the success for college football. Basketball was in even worse shape. I mean, they went 47 years from 1947 to 1993 without making a single NCAA tournament. We think for Wisconsin going to the NIT stakes, that would have been like a huge deal. They only went to the NIT, I think, 5 times during that stretch. So I think that weighs against them, but you can't argue the success that they've had over the last 30 years. Multiple Big Ten titles. In football, they have the highest winning percentage of any team not to make the college football playoff. I think right next to Penn State. You look at basketball, obviously we had a national championship in our grasp just a handful of years ago, multiple Big Ten titles. So sorry to bring up PTSD. It does for me every time too. So I think Wisconsin there. And then obviously we already talked about UCLA. I had them there largely with a lot of their athletic achievements in some other sports, but also just a history of historical achievement since the onset of their athletic department.
So is that in order for your tier 2?
Yeah, so I have UCLA, Wisconsin, Maryland, Michigan State, Nebraska.
Okay, so it's interesting. So I have Nebraska just slightly ahead of Wisconsin. And again, it's weighed mostly on that football brand. I think people underestimate how powerful that Nebraska football brand is.
Still is.
You know, money flows through that stadium and that program. And even though the titles are from the 90s, I mean, they had more previous to that as well. The people who were watching those games are now parents and grandparents with a lot of money, and their kids are in Nebraska. Like that still matters. Like winning titles in the 90s isn't irrelevant. People think that it didn't happen. It's so long ago. That's not like Minnesota football where you're talking in like the 50s and 60s and 30s, whatever it is. Like that to me still bears significance. All right, let's take one more quick break. We got friends of the show, and then we're going to talk tier 1, and I'm going to get Lucas's take on Greg Gard and the Badgers basketball program, a hot button topic as always. All right, but first, today's show is brought to you by our good friends over at Built Bar. And Built Bar, listen, March Madness is going on. It is the favorite time to try your favorite Built Bar, your favorite puff, whatever it is from Built. Go to March Madness, builtmarchmadness.com. Vote for your favorites. You know, I'll be voting for the churro bar, which is incredible. Tons of protein, crazy good flavor. And if you want your favorite to win, you'll be voting for that bar as well. Support your team, support your favorite bar, your favorite flavor. And when you vote for your favorite bar, you'll be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. Not going to beat that anywhere. Plus, one Locked On fan who votes will get a 12-month subscription to Built, have free Built bars delivered every single month of your favorite flavor to your door just for betting or going online and doing a free March Madness bracket with your favorite flavors. You got to try Built, the best protein bar ever. Seriously, they're incredible. 100% real chocolate, tons of protein, not a lot of sugar. And what makes them so good, again, is the taste and the health combined into one. Run to BuiltBarMadness.com right now. Vote for your favorite bar. Pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. All right, let's get Lucas back in here. And again, man, really appreciate you jumping in. This is a fun conversation. These are some of the things I like to be able to do on the show too, is we can talk about topics that people would talk about in a bar. Like what's the best brand in the Big Ten? All right, so we're into our tier 1. I think we obviously have the same mix of schools here, but I'm curious about your order. What order are you going with your tier 1 Big Ten brands?
So tier 1. So I am going with, this is going to kill me. I'm going with Ohio State as my top tier 1. I'm going with USC second. And I'm going with maybe my most despised Big Ten school, Michigan. And then I have Penn State after that at number 4.
Yeah, so we're in the same order, considering I have Penn State as my only tier 2 school. I have Ohio State, USC, Michigan. I actually didn't really struggle with that top 3. That felt like a really, actually the top 4. That felt like a pretty obvious kind of mark in the sand, and then the rest of the schools are jumbled up behind them.
Yeah, no, that was kind of me. As much as it pains me, because especially Ohio State and Michigan, we all know they're good. They know they're good, and it hates for me to have to reinforce that to them. But it is what it is. I mean, with Ohio State, just in football alone, man, you could argue that Ohio State might be the most consistent program ever Like they have like no down years. It's like them in Oklahoma. Even like Alabama had really rough years before Nick Saban took them over. And then they're also really good in all their other sports. Obviously, basketball. They've made a couple national title runs under Thad Matta. They've been consistently good in that regard. Michigan, kind of the same way. They've been good and really good in both sports. Football, obviously, this big resurgence under Jim Harbaugh, but all the history, the tradition, and then obviously in basketball too. They've owned a couple national titles. They've made a couple runs recently here under John Beilein, and have won a couple Big Ten titles. So I think it's there. USC. I mean, I think that brand. We've already talked about UCLA and how LA kind of personifies that brand. It's 10 times that, I believe, with USC. They're the LA school out there. And the fact that you are the school in the second biggest country in the US, they're treated very much like a professional team out there. And when they're rolling, that fan base is extremely energized. And they've had a resurgence in basketball here under Andy Antfield. They're in the tournament this season. They've made a couple deep runs under him too. And just maybe one of the richest programs historical wise. And I think with Penn State, the same thing. History wise for football, they're one of the most historic brands. They're in a massive state as well in Pennsylvania, and they are the program. Sorry, Pitt fans, but Penn State dominates that state of Pennsylvania. And I think they also have a brand. I think Penn State kind of a blue collar kind of mentality that really fits the Big Ten. And they're great. It boggles my mind how Penn State still has not been consistently good at basketball when I think they have every resource to do so. But all their non-revenue sports, they're extremely good in. You talk about volleyball, wrestling. Heck, they even just added hockey like 10 years ago, and they're like a perennial top 10 team in hockey every year now too. So that was really kind of what rounded I think Penn State, if they had a better basketball program, maybe they could push their way up there, but that was why I had them at 4 in that top tier.
Yeah, it's well said, man. I think those 4 brands, especially if you talk iconic brands. I mean, it's USC, it's Michigan, it's Ohio State. Penn State's kind of on the periphery if you're talking the elite of the elite brands, but like I just don't think there's an argument there to put any other Big Ten school into that mix. I did want to hit on your point too with Ohio State and always being consistently good. It seems like every year someone says, well, Stroud is gone and what's the new quarterback? I mean, just like, listen, they always have a guy. Just stop. There's always going to be a dude at quarterback. Because think of the last, I was doing this thought experiment with somebody else, a buddy of mine who's working at ESPN. We're like, off the top of your head, who's the last bad Ohio State quarterback you can think of? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Like we were like, brain. We're like, you just go through the Rolodex.
Who was before Craig Krenzel?
Right. That's my point. Like, bad quarterbacks ever.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's incredible. Every school has at least 1 or 2 bad quarterbacks in like the last 15 years where you're like, at least in Ohio State, it's just like, just stop it, man.
Well, you could say that like maybe out of the last how many years, maybe JT Barrett or Braxton Miller has been their worst one, but he would have been probably still the best quarterback in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
Like that's how much better they've been.
Those dudes are killers in the Big Ten. Like that's the thing. Like, Braxton Miller wasn't an NFL quarterback. In the Big Ten, he was a handful.
Yes.
It's nauseating, quite frankly. I want to really quick finish up here. I think for the most part, we're within shouting distance on most of our picks outside of, I think Maryland and UCLA are probably the biggest. Difference points there. I don't think that Maryland football program is good enough to be in tier 2. There's not enough there, but I respect the fact that they do have a national title in a relatively recent time frame here. Let's talk Greg Gard. Let's talk basketball quickly. Let's finish that. I want to get your take on, there's this huge spectrum of people who literally want him fired right now, and people who say, no problems. He won Big Ten Coach of the Year last year. Everyone just relax. In that giant spectrum, where do you fall?
So I'm definitely not in the fired Gard camp. I have been a pretty feverish Gard supporter. I remember when the fire Gard, crowd was coming out, especially in 2020, when that season looked like it was completely crumbling. They were not playing well. Then they have the issues with Kobe King. You have their strength coach having to resign over something racial that he had said. And it looked like Greg Gard was just kind of losing control of the program, and it looked like they were not going to make the tournament for the second time in like 3 years. But then they were able to pull it together, and they ended up winning a Big Ten title. And he's now won a Big Ten title twice in the last 3 years, and yet we're still hearing this. Look, they're having a down year. That's just what it is. To me, you fire a coach for a down trend, not a down year. We fired Paul Chryst because the football program was on a 3-year downtrend. That didn't look like was reversing anytime soon. Greg Gard has shown, after a down year that he can flip it. He can learn from his mistakes. He's already pointed to the fact that he knows this team needs more depth. They're going to attack the transfer portal. I like the 3 recruits that they're bringing in. I think at least 2 of them, I think Gus Yalden, John Blackwell will be able to play right away, which I think that alone will alleviate their depth issues on this team. And the fact is they're still playing. They got a game on Sunday. I'm going to cheer like hell for them. And I get the criticism. I think some of it is warranted. Like the recruiting issues that he has had the last few years are definitely a cause of concern. But I do think generally he's still serving this program proud. They've still made the tournament more years than not. And they just won a Big Ten title, for God's sakes, last year when people picked them to finish 10th last year. So, and we're not even talking about this if they win maybe half of those close games that they lost this year. If they don't let Hunter Dickinson hit a crazy 3-pointer. Sorry.
No, it's good.
Hit a crazy 3-pointer. They win that game. If they can get 1 bucket against Rutgers, they win that game in the final 3 minutes. Purdue, I mean, the list goes on and on about the chances they had this year. If they decide to play against Ohio State, they probably win that game by 15. So I am not in the fire Greg Gard camp. If they have another down year next year, then yeah, I think then you can bring, I think then it might be time to make a change, but he has earned the right to turn this ship around. You don't fire good head coaches too soon. I mean, I brought up an example before the pod about Matt Painter. Matt Painter's first 6 years at Purdue were really good. He took them, they were a down program the last couple of years under Gene Cady they won a Big Ten title. And then after his 7th and 8th year, they didn't make the tournament. They were like a 500 mediocre Big Ten team. But yet they stuck through him. He changed some things. And now look at them. Ever since then, they've won multiple Big Ten titles. We've seen them make some decent runs in the NCAA tournament, and they've probably been arguably one of the most consistent teams in the Big Ten. So they basically were what Bo Ryan had us going at, kind of perennial top 4 and making runs in the NCAA tournament. So I am not in the fire Gard camp. I think, yes, there are concerns, but I think he's deserved the right to ride the ship and figure this out. Yeah,
and for those who have listened to the show, that's mostly where I'm at as well. I will make one point, and while I agree with, and CJ Abbott says the NIT doesn't count, I know there's differences in opinion of whether or not we should be cheering for them or be excited for it. I do want to point out one thing, though, that I see repeated a lot, and I'm not attacking you on this point.
Yeah.
But certainly several of those games could have been flipped the other way. There's several close wins that could also be flipped the other way.
That's also true, yes.
And that's part of the issue with this team is if you play so closely to every team and you can't separate, you do put yourself in that spot, you know. And your point is 100% correct. Like Hunter Dickinson there's no reason logically that shot should have gone in, right?
No.
But that's also kind of the case when you have a 5-minute slump offensively in that game. You put yourself in those spots, unfortunately. But mostly I agree with you on Greg Gard. I think it's a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction. And I'll point this out. We talked about this off camera or offline before we got started. I don't remember people coming into my comments last year saying he needs to be fired, you know, or even at the beginning of this year. So it feels like an overreaction based on just 2 bad months. And to me, that's too quick of a knee-jerk decision.
Agreed. And I agree with that statement too, because last year when they won the Big Ten, I mean, they were lethal in close games. I think people forget they also played a ton of close games. It was just they only lost like 1 or 2. And I think we had some regression to the mean this year. And we also lost, you know, an All-American and top 10 NBA draft pick in Johnny Davis, who helped you close a lot of those games. So, you know, like I said, I'm interested to see how they do turn around, how they do attack the portal. And some people might say, like CJ, that the NIT doesn't count. If Stephen Crowell puts up performances like he did on what was that, Tuesday night, and that carries over not just in the NIT, but that carries over into next year. That's a hard argument to say the NIT doesn't count, because I think that's what you're using the NIT for, is to be somewhat of a springboard for these guys going into next season.
And yeah, I'll finish on that. And I appreciate everybody tuning in on the show. Obviously, appreciate Lucas. So the Rip Hamilton UConn team that ended up winning a title for Calhoun, they were an NIT team a year or two before and performed really well there. They use that as a springboard. It's an interesting thing where, it can really help. And if you can get something, I would love to see Siegen go on a bit of a tear at the end here. Yeah. Certainly whatever Crowell can do to carry over. I don't think it's useless. I also made the point on the show, and I don't think Lucas is suggesting this. There should be no banners hung. Like you're not, if you go on a great run, no, but we're not here for that. Let's be clear.
No, if you have a national championship finalist banner up, you cannot put up an NIT like championship. Yeah. I can't remember if they have, because I know they have like the tiles around the Kohl Center that show like Big Ten champs. I don't know if they have one for NIT. They might, but I'm not sure. But
if you put it up there, you got to sneak it up there. You can't have like an unveiling, right? Like here's the NIT banner. You just got to kind of sneak it up there when no one's in the room and hope nobody's makes too big a deal out of it.
We're above that. It's the same. I'm a big Brewers fan, and the Brewers, when they win the wild card, they put up a banner that said like 2020 or 2019 wild card champs. I'm like, okay, don't do that. Division champs, okay. Wow, like don't do that. But yeah, NIT, no. Don't, even if they win it, don't put it up there.
Right. I hear you, man. And a bunch of people in the comments, a lot of them going in on Hunter Dickinson, which I'm all here for. Anyway, let's wrap it up there. Lucas, thank you so much for joining in. Love to do it again at some point. We're going to put your show link up in our show notes as well, so people can come and find the work you're doing. For everybody in the chat, appreciate you all so much. Sorry we didn't get a show up earlier today. So this is kind of the show for today, but appreciate everybody on Wisconsin, and let's keep it going.